I watched a guide dog save a blind woman in Seattle one wet evening, and it changed how I look at every crosswalk in this city. Her name was Linda Pierce. She held a leather harness in one hand, a folded white cane in the other, and trusted a yellow Labrador more than she could ever trust her own eyes. Bailey, her old guide dog, walked on her left in a worn brown harness. On the right, half a step behind, trotted Harbor, a 5-month-old Labrador puppy on a simple leash, all legs and curiosity. I stood back on the corner, rain on my face, pretending I was just another trainer observing a routine guide dog walk in downtown Seattle, Washington. The light changed. Engines growled. Bailey moved first, steady and sure, guiding Linda off the curb. Harbor copied him like a shadow, ears up, nose tilted toward the moving traffic. You could see the difference in one glance. Bailey's steps were quiet facts. Harbor's were questions. Halfway across, a pickup truck decided the yellow light was a suggestion, not a rule. I heard the engine rise and felt the air tighten. Linda didn't see it. Harbor didn't understand it. Bailey did. The old Labrador threw his whole body sideways across Linda's legs and locked the harness. Harbor, not knowing why, slammed his paws into the slick paint and pulled to. The truck's brakes screamed, stopping so close I saw Bailey's fur ripple in the wind it pushed. Linda let out a shaky laugh, thinking it was just a close call, just city traffic. Harbor pressed his wet nose into her hip and wouldn't move. Watching that puppy tremble beside the veteran dog, I didn't realize I was seeing the first second of a story where Harbor would be asked to do far more than copy someone else's steps. I first met Linda because of a yellow Labrador, not because of her blindness. Bailey padded into our guide dog training room in Seattle, harness in his teeth like he already knew the job. A retinal disease took Linda's sight in a few brutal months. By the time she and Bailey were matched, she moved like someone who had shrunk herself to fit the apartment walls. Bailey refused to let her stay small. He walked with a slow, certain stride that pulled her shoulders back and set her feet in motion again. Years passed under his paws. Curbs, buses, hospital corridors, crosswalks shining with Seattle rain. Bailey learned them all. At 10 years old, he still mapped the world like a professional, but after a long route, it took him a full minute to stand. His body was sending a message his heart didn't want to send. In guide dog work, we pretend for a while that a great dog will stay strong forever. Then one day, you watch him hesitate at the top of the stairs just once, and you know you're out of pretending. Bailey had reached that point. I put his chart on the table and said the sentence nobody wanted to hear. He needs a successor while he can still teach. That's when Harbor appeared on my screen for the first time. 5 months old, yellow Labrador puppy from a foster home near Tacoma. In the short video, he kept checking the woman on the other end of the leash instead of staring at the camera. He watched her face after every command, like her breathing mattered more than the treat. That look, dog to person, asking, "Are you okay?" is what made me circle his name. Bailey had given Linda back her streets. Harbor, if we didn't fail him, would learn those streets beside the old dog's shadow. Harbor arrived at Linda's apartment on a gray afternoon, a 5-month-old yellow Labrador puppy whose paws still hadn't agreed on one walking speed. He skidded, tail beating the air, nose locked on the smell of Bailey's fur and Linda's clothes. Bailey walked up without a sound. He touched noses with Harbor once, then shifted so his shoulder pressed into Linda's leg, placing himself between the woman, the harness on the hook, and this new clumsy pup. Harbor tried to treat all of it as a game. He mouthed the leather handle, tugged the strap, pawed at Bailey's worn guide dog harness like it was another toy. Linda reached out through habit more than sight. Her hands found the soft coat at Harbor's neck, just above the place where a harness would rest one day. The puppy went still, heart hammering against her fingers as if his body understood work before he ever heard the word. His job was one thing. Watch Bailey stop at curbs, plant his feet, swing his body across Linda's path so her shin met fur, not traffic. Watch the old Labrador stand and listen until the engines faded. Harbor trotted behind them, copying more than he understood. When a bus sighed too close or a skateboard cracked on the sidewalk, he slid, then shoved his whole side into Bailey's ribs until the older dog's steady breathing pulled him back together. The first time he moved before Bailey, no trainer was there. Linda walked her usual block. Bailey slowed for the corner, joints stiff. Harbor felt the drop of the curb under his paws and swung his small body across her knees, leash drawn tight. Her hand went down, expecting the broad chest that had guided her. Instead, she found a narrower frame, shaking a little, a young Labrador learning to hold the world still so she could take one more step. Harbor did his work on his own for the first time. Long months of training passed. Harbor left Linda's apartment for school on a cold, bright morning that made Seattle feel sharper than usual. He was 11 months old now, more Labrador than puppy. But when Frank clipped on the leash, his ears still flew back like a child's. Bailey walked them to the door. The old guide dog touched noses with Harbor, then pressed his head once into Linda's palm, the way he had on their first day together. I watched a blind woman crouch in the hallway and wrap both arms around a young yellow Labrador like she was trying to memorize his shape. On campus, Harbor froze at the edge of our training yard. So many harnesses, so many barking voices and echoing footsteps. He leaned his whole weight against my leg, searching for a life that smelled like Linda's laundry and Bailey's fur. We started with simple things, targeting curbs, waiting at every sound of an engine, learning that the harness handle means think, and the leash means relax. He made mistakes like any guide dog in training, but every time I said Linda's name, his head snapped toward me, as if the word itself was a bell only he could hear. At night, he lay awake longer than the other dogs. When the building settled and the last doors shut, Harbor would nose the kennel bars and whine once, very softly, like he was answering a question Linda couldn't ask out loud. In his report, I wrote about progress and timing and route work. What I didn't write was the part that mattered to me most. This Labrador wasn't just learning to lead a blind woman through Seattle. He was learning how to live with the space she left whenever she wasn't there. Harbor came back to Linda on one of those Seattle days when the sky changed its mind every minute. He stepped out of the school van with a brown harness folded over his back, the same yellow Labrador who used to skid across her hallway tiles, but now his eyes measured every sound. He knew work. Linda didn't see the door slide open, but she felt the air change. Her hands were already out when Harbor's paws hit the sidewalk. He walked straight into her, pressed his ribs into her knees, then lifted his head so her fingers landed on the place where the handle would rest. We had practiced that move for weeks at school. With her, he did it once, and his whole body relaxed, like this was the only version that ever mattered. Bailey came to meet him. Frank opened the apartment door, and the old guide dog took a few stiff steps onto the landing. His tail started up when he caught Harbor's scent. But halfway to the younger dog, his back legs slipped and his claws scraped the wood. The sound was small and quick, but Linda flinched like she felt it through the floor. After that, the two Labradors shared the same short routes. Bailey worked in harness, guiding Linda through crosswalks filmed with drizzle, stopping at curbs the way he always had. Harbor followed behind, copying every stop and every listening pause, learning the map of their block from inside Bailey's shadow. Sometime after midnight, Harbor woke, nudged Bailey's ribs once, twice, then shoved his head under Linda's hand until she came fully awake. He wanted to tell her something very important. Bailey's heart stopped that night. Linda sat on the cold floor with her hands buried in Bailey's fur, saying thank you into a body that wouldn't rise again. Harbor stood between her and the door, shaking, already trying to understand how to lead a woman whose world had just gone dark for the second time. The morning after Bailey died, the hallway outside Linda's door sounded wrong. Too quiet, like the building was holding its breath for a harness that would never click again. Frank stood with his hand on the doorknob, like a man outside a hospital room, knowing that once he opened it, their life would not sound the same. Harbor pressed against Linda's knees, brown training harness folded over his yellow Labrador back. His ears flicked at every sound in the stairwell. When I set the handle into Linda's hand, her fingers closed around it and shook as if the leather were hot. "I don't know if I can ask him to do this," she whispered. "You're not asking him alone," I said. "You're asking all of us." Harbor didn't understand the words, but he felt the weight behind them and leaned harder into her leg, chest against her shin, as if to say, "I'm here. I'll try." We started with what grief could survive, down the hallway, into the lobby. To the mailbox and back, the same short trip again and again. Harness on meant Harbor had to think for both of them. Harness off meant he could curl against her on the couch and just be a young Labrador who had already watched one guide dog leave and not return. Outside, Seattle moved like it always did. Buses sighed, brakes hissed, wet tires whispered over the crosswalk paint. Linda felt the city through the soles of her shoes and the tug of the harness. Harbor felt it in sound and scent and in the way the air shifted before a car turned. At every sidewalk edge, he stopped too early, body thrown in front of her legs, blocking a 3-inch drop like it was a cliff. Frank hovered behind them, ready to grab, but he watched Harbor's trembling tail and understood this wasn't laziness. This was the moment Harbor stopped being just a student. Harbor was a year and a half old when Linda clipped on his harness and stepped into the Seattle rain. He was her guide dog now, still a young Labrador who checked every sound twice before trusting the street. They took the route to the pharmacy. Linda counted corners through her soles and the pull of the harness. At the busy intersection, Harbor stopped early and swung his body across her shins so she met wet fur instead of open air. The light flipped. The driver had his phone in one hand as he rolled into the crosswalk he was supposed to be watching. Harbor heard the engine. He didn't see colors, just the sudden wrong rush of metal where there should have been waiting cars. With no Bailey and no trainer, he dropped his weight backward. He slammed his shoulder into Linda's legs and tore her off the painted lines so hard she stumbled and lost the edge of the curb. The bumper caught Harbor as he turned. Steel hit his back leg and spun his hindquarters out from under him, dragging him over the wet white stripes. When the car stopped, he lay on his side. A stranger helped Linda find her guide dog. She went to her knees and reached for him. The young Labrador looked at Linda, pressed his nose to her palm, and tapped his tail once or twice, as if to let everyone know, "She's okay. I did it." Sirens closed in around them. When they lifted Harbor onto the stretcher, he didn't fight, just kept his eyes turned toward the sound of Linda's shaking voice. I saw Harbor again under hospital lights, not street lights. The emergency room made every hair on his Labrador coat look too bright. His front paws were wrapped in gauze, his back leg braced for x-rays, but his eyes tracked every sound looking for Linda. They had given him something for pain, but Harbor fought sleep as long as he could. Every time Linda's voice cracked in the hallway, one ear twitched. Then his tail thumped once against the metal table, as if he were still telling us, "She's okay." Only when the drugs finally pulled him under did his body stop shaking. The films came back, and the vet's shoulders dropped. Fractured bones in the back leg, no shrapnel, no open wound, nothing that would end his life, but damage deep enough to change how that young Labrador would move. "Will he walk?" Linda asked, hand on the crate. The vet nodded. "With surgery and rehab, yes. He can live as a normal dog, play, go on walks. He'll be slower and tire sooner. I wouldn't trust this leg for full guide work again." Later, in a small consultation room, the guide dog school representative folded her hands and said the words I knew were coming. "In our program, he has to be retired. We'll list Harbor as a career change dog. You can keep him as a pet, or we can find him a good home, and we'll match you with a new, fully qualified guide dog." Linda flinched at retired, like it was another impact. On paper, the choice sounded simple. Rehab for Harbor didn't look heroic. It looked like short, stubborn walks on a rubber mat. Weeks turned into months of careful steps and tight circles around the same patch of parking lot outside the rehab clinic in Seattle. Every time his back leg slipped, he caught himself with his chest and still turned his head toward any voice that sounded like Linda. When the stitches were gone and the fur grew back in a crooked line over the fracture, the vet called us into the exam room. Harbor stood on the floor between us, weight mostly on 3 legs, the fourth hovering just enough to show where the accident still lived. The vet watched him walk, watched him turn, then put both hands on that damaged limb and pressed. "No flinch," she said. "No sign of pain today. He'll always have a mechanical limp, but the bone is strong. Shorter walks, more rest. If you respect his limits, he won't know he's different." Linda's fingers found the thick fur at Harbor's neck. "So he can walk with me," she said. "He can still be my guide dog." The vet hesitated. "As your companion, yes," she answered. "As a full-time guide, I can't recommend it. One bad fall for either of you, one day he pushes through fatigue because you ask him to, and we're back here all over again. The next week, the school emails started coming. Photos of young Labradors in crisp harnesses, phrases like fully qualified, safer long-term option. Frank read every message at the kitchen table. Harbor lay under Linda's chair, his bad leg tucked in tight, his nose on her slipper. By the fifth email, she stopped him with a small shake of her head. "If I let them take him," she said, "I'll walk better, but I won't know where I am." The guide dog school invited Linda to campus on a bright afternoon in Seattle. They had a new yellow Labrador waiting in the training hall, taller than Harbor, muscles even under a spotless harness. I walked beside Linda while Harbor limped on her other side, his bad leg touching the floor a heartbeat late with every step. Inside, the room smelled like polish and dog shampoo. The new guide dog stood in a perfect stay, ears forward, tail level, the picture we put in brochures. When the trainer called, he moved like a metronome, no hitch, no wobble, every footfall exactly where it should be. We swapped harness handles. For the first time since the accident, Linda let another Labrador take point. He led her around cones, up and down a fake curb, through a doorway. From where I stood, it looked like a training video. Clean, smooth, safe. Halfway through the route, Linda's free hand drifted down, searching for Harbor out of habit. Her fingers met empty air. On the bench by the wall, Harbor pressed against Frank's leg, watching every move with dark, worried eyes. "How does it feel?" the representative asked when they finished. "Safer, isn't it?" Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. She turned toward the sound of Harbor shifting his weight, nails ticking softly on the mat. "I know where I am when I hear his limp," she said. "It's the sound of him choosing me." The room went quiet enough to hear Harbor breathe. On the way out, Frank took the leash from me and walked between them in the doorway. "You understand we just chose the harder life, right?" he murmured. She nodded once, like she had finally decided which kind of hard she could live with. For a while, I kept expecting Linda to call and say she'd changed her mind, that she would send Harbor to a warm backyard and take the perfect new guide dog instead. That call never came. Instead, she asked me to come to their block and help her figure out how to live in a smaller circle that still had Harbor in the center. We sat at the kitchen table with a city map spread under our hands. Frank circled the places they could reach with a slower, limping Labrador. The small grocery, the pharmacy, one bus stop with a bench. Harbor lay under Linda's chair, bad leg tucked in tight, his chin resting on her foot. Every time the pen scratched, her fingers slid down to his neck, like she needed to touch him to believe the lines we were drawing. Short walks became their new routes. Harbor led her down the stairs, across the lobby, past the mailbox, out into the Seattle drizzle. He stopped at every curb with exaggerated care, getting his body angled across her knees, as if the drop were a cliff edge, not 3 inches of concrete. Sometimes he simply sat and waited until his breathing evened out, telling her in the only language he had, "We move when it's safe for both of us." On the days his limp was heavier, Frank took the long errands and hospital visits. But Linda would not let anyone take Harbor. "He lost that leg for my life," she told me once, hand buried in his fur. "I won't sign him away because he isn't perfect for theirs." To her, he wasn't a career change dog. He was the sound at the end of the harness that meant home, the heartbeat that pulled her out of the dark twice. From the sidewalk, it looked ordinary. An older woman, her husband, and a yellow Labrador with a crooked step walking to the corner store. But standing there, I heard the soft tap of Harbor's limp and the way Linda's shoulders settled when he blocked each curb, and I knew this was the only freedom she was willing to fight for now. They had rebuilt their world around his uneven gait. There was only one place left they hadn't dared to go together yet, the intersection where Harbor had given up his straight walk to keep her alive. Harbor's limp had become part of their rhythm, not a wound. The bone was strong, no pain, just a mechanical hitch in one back leg. Their walks were ordinary now, only slower. Same grocery, same pharmacy, same drizzle over the streets, just more pauses to breathe together at every curb. I walked a few paces behind. From across the street, they looked like any older couple in their yellow lab. At the crosswalk, Harbor stopped early and set his chest in front of her shins. Engines idled. He lifted his head, listened, and waded past the first gap. just to be sure. Then he chose their moment and led Linda over the white lines, one careful stride at a time. On the far side, he leaned into her knees and exhaled. Linda smiled in a way I hadn't seen since before the accident. "Our life isn't harder," she said softly. "It's just our pace now. We made the right choice." I think about them whenever people ask me what a guide dog really does. It's not just traffic checks and curbs. It's two lives deciding together how to move through a world that doesn't slow down for pain. If Harbor's story reached you, share it so more people see what a Labrador like him gives and what it costs. Somewhere there is another blind woman, another guide dog, another hard choice between easy freedom and loyal, limping steps. Together, we turn rescue into hope.